This is WCN, the Whole Care Network. You talk, we listen. Content presented on the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed during this podcast are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent views of the Whole Care Network. Always consult your physician for medical and fitness advice, and always consult your attorney for legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
Have you ever met anybody that has caregiving on their bucket list of things to do in life?
Beyond caregiving, how do we care?
We also have to care for ourselves.
How do we treat friends, family, strangers we meet?
Forget it.
How do we heal? The physical, social, financial, spiritual.
Hello.
By creating healing ties. Tying it all together like a bow tie. With your host, Christopher McClellan, the bow tie guy.
Well, greetings, everyone. It is Chris McClellan. Well, Christopher McClellan, however you want to say it. But you probably know me as the bow tie guy, and welcome to another episode of Healing Ties, featured on the Whole Care Network. On the Whole Care Network, we are all about sharing stories and resources because we believe it's through story sharing where diversity meets the road to collaborate on a common cause. And our common cause is supporting caregivers before, during, and after caregiving ends. And as you know, we're celebrating National Family Caregivers Month with the reboot of the popular Healing Ties podcast. Well, I think it's popular. A few other people have said so too, with our 30 podcast and 30 days to celebrate National Family Caregivers Month. And just as important, the soft launch of our new Whole Care Network website. So when you get a chance, please visit our new website at thewholecarenetwork.com. Well, you got to get to the old site first. You get to the new site, you'll see the link. It's right on the front page. You'll figure it out when you see it. But when you get to the new site, you'll have the opportunity to meet Bo, because Bo ties things together on the Whole Care Network. Once you see Bo, you'll get it 100%. And during our soft launch, we are asking our listeners to provide us with feedback on our new site so that we can continue to build our site where you can easily find your favorite podcasts, favorite blogs, and videos. Oh, and by the way, you'll be able to research content on the Whole Care Network via our 4 pillars of care: our physical, social, financial, and spiritual health. All content will be categorized in one or all 4 of those categories. And be on the lookout for our new YouTube channel featuring live shows, our streaming 24/7 radio station, and a few other things that are happening with the Whole Care Network in 2021. Well, enough from me. My guest on this episode of Healing Ties is Larry Nisenson, who is the Senior Vice President, Chief Commercial Officer for Genworth U.S. Life Insurance segment, including, and I can't wait to get into this, CareScout Caregiver Support Services, an innovative program designed to provide expert guidance and personal support for those struggling to find the right help for their loved ones. And Larry, welcome to Healing Ties. It's great to visit with you today. Thanks for taking the time.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me, Christopher. What a great intro. I can't wait to see the new site when it's up.
I'm pretty excited too. Each day it gets a little closer, and then it gives me the opportunity to meet with folks like yourself who are really creating an impact for family caregivers across the country. But I know a lot about your bio and your background, but tell our listeners a little bit about you, and then we'll get into the details of our conversation.
Absolutely. And let me first start off by saying I am one of the fortunate few that get to blend their passion with what they do for a living. And so I happen to be a caregiver for the last 17 years, both on a part-time basis for my father and for my father-in-law while he was alive. My wife and I provided ongoing care for him. And in my day job, I happen to lead the sales, marketing, distribution, and product group for Genworth Insurance Company, which is a 140-year-old insurance company, really focused in on what we describe as the financing of aging. So products and services for folks as they get older, like long-term care insurance. But what I'm hoping we're going to talk about today is something that is much closer to my heart, which also happens to be part of my day job. And that's the education and awareness around family caregiving, the dilemma, the incredible balancing act of family caregivers. There's over 40 million of them in the workforce who every day get up and try and provide for their loved ones and try and provide by putting food on the table, by going to work every day. And Genworth is passionate about helping those caregivers out through our CareScout company, which is a care advocacy company that we bought about a decade ago and has been in business for over 20 years.
Well, CareScout, as I've had the opportunity to look through it and then your background, it's great. Isn't it great to be able to work in an area that you're passionate about, that you have a personal connection to, that is impacting the lives of others positively?
Oh my gosh, I love it. And I often tell people the story that when I got that fateful call on a Tuesday at 4:00, which by the way was indeed a Tuesday at 4:00 in my case, I'd been in the financial services and insurance business for over 20 years. And you would think that, or just at almost 20 years, and you would think that at that point I would know what to do, right? I had been a financial advisor. I had the financial acumen. I had the insurance background. I had everything set up. You would think when that call came, I would have been into warp overdrive and taken care of everything. And truthfully, Christopher, I pulled over to the side of the road and I had no idea what to do. And so to have a resource that we make available now to help guide people through the myriad of choices when they're making these at the worst time of their lives, to be able to provide service and help people make those decisions is incredibly rewarding and powerful for us.
Workplace, caregiving in workplace is very special to me because I wrote my master's thesis on caregiving stress and the impact in the workplace. And then when I had the opportunity to connect with you and know that, we all have these stories and why we're doing what we're doing. And I personally believe, and I'm pretty sure you'll agree with it, the best information and referral usually comes from one caregiver to another because we've been in the trenches. We understand the language.
It's so true. It's amazing to me. And you can tell when you meet somebody, and even in a professional setting, there's a level of empathy and understanding that is immediate in the connection. I'll tell you a quick story. We employ an outside ad agency to help us with a lot of the material and our go-to-market strategy and writing the websites, et cetera. And when we went into the initial meeting, I'm telling the story of what we're trying to do. And I could see this woman sitting across from me had a connection to us. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know what it was. And afterwards found out she was a multiple caregiver providing currently long distance care to her loved ones. Goodness. And you could see the level of empathy, understanding. It was just pouring out of her and the rest of the agency. And that connection is so important. You and I know that. Mm-hmm. And I imagine all of your listeners who are caregivers can relate to exactly what we're talking about.
So to be able to work with somebody, especially in an ad agency that really got the message, was very beneficial.
So important. And I will say that in Genworth, I've worked in several large international insurance companies. And I will say that at Genworth and CareScout, we happen to have probably a higher concentration of personal family caregivers than most companies. There's an attraction to go work for a place that is aligned with how you are in your personal life. And Genworth is a unbelievably empathetic company and has done incredible things to make caregiving responsibilities much easier for our employees.
I was fortunate while I was in the middle of caring for my partner, Richard, that the organization I was working for, their the president CEO, he got it. He got what the issue is. He recognized that I needed a little bit more flex time and needed to take care of my partner. But there's thousands upon thousands of employees out there that don't have that flexibility, and it always amazes me that when you kind of dig into the numbers a little bit, a lot of those companies and organizations that don't recognize the caregiving crisis in the workplace most likely have not been caregivers themselves.
There's no question. It's hard to use positive and COVID-19 in the same sentence. I will grant you, but
that's so true.
But only in this instance will I put those two together to say the positive impact of COVID-19 in the employee-employer relationship is that almost every employer that I've come across has created a more empathetic platform for their employees. They understand, the numbers are startling. In general, there are over 40 million unpaid family caregivers.
Yes.
That's a established number. What's interesting is Genworth sponsored a COVID-19 consumer sentiment study, and we looked at the number of caregivers in the March and April timeframe. So when companies had sent their employees home, when schools had sent the students home, when many people moved their loved ones that were still healthy from assisted living facilities back home to sort of bring that nuclear family together, that number went from 40 million caregivers to over 100 million, one out of every three people. And so from a company standpoint, they didn't have a choice anymore. They had to help try and figure out how to navigate in short order, right? They didn't have a lot of time to figure it out. And it has forced the conversation to the front of the line instead of on a back burner sitting on a stove somewhere. And most companies that I've spoken to, and we just last week met with about 50 companies to talk through what their platforms are for caregivers. Most are seemingly up to the task, which is, again, sort of this weird positive outcome of COVID.
It's almost relatable to, you look back into the late 70s, going into the early 80s, about the crisis with childcare companies faced. How did the change happen? Because companies started to realize that this was an issue. And
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Go for it.
Yeah, you're 100% right. But on the flip side of it, where I would say we haven't done enough, I read something over the weekend. It was a report about women leaving the workforce. And, in spite of all of the advances, and as a father of three daughters, I have a personal connection to this, that in spite of all of the advances that women have made in career, and certainly breaking through many glass ceilings in compensation, and they continue to make strides, one of the statistics that jumped out at me over the weekend was the number of women that have left the workforce in aggregate, right? When they look at number of women in the workforce, we had made such great strides since the mid-1980s. However, post-COVID, so look at the numbers today, they've actually stepped back to pre-Ronald Reagan era numbers because they've been forced in many ways to leave the workforce to deal with this caregiving issue. And it does not affect all people equally, for sure. And so far, it seems women have really borne the brunt of this.
Very much so. Caregiving, I've always felt that it was kind of the, it was kind of the equalizer. There's no economic boundaries. There's no gender boundaries. There's no orientation boundaries. Caregiving impacts everybody.
It does, for sure. And, you can look at the statistics and they bear that out in every way. They bear it out in the percentage of women and men. It's roughly 50-50. They certainly bear it out in economic class, for sure, although some of the latest data has shown an increase in some of the minority communities that bear more of the weight of this. And of course, the economic impact varies by wealth, right? Those that can afford, the average caregiver we know spends over $10,000 a year out of their own pocket on caring for their loved one. Well, that $10,000 number, much more, it's a regressive number in the sense that those on the lower end of the economic scale certainly bear that responsibility and the impact of that much more.
Right. And it all comes back to what we started our conversation with. How do you prepare for an emergency like this? Nobody has caregiving on their bucket list of things to do in life, and then it happens, and what do?
It is, you either prepare for it or it prepares for you.
Exactly.
Those are really the choices. Unfortunately, this again, statistically speaking, 7 out of 10 people will have a long-term care event. It doesn't mean that it will require nursing home, assisted living, but they will have something that will require help, right? We know the cost of that help is astronomical. How people pay for it, if they choose to self-insure, they choose to rely on family members, it's entirely up to them. And I know,
Right.
Christopher, you and I have talked about this before. I just want to raise awareness, as I know you do. I want people to know what is likely coming and plan however they would want to.
And be connected with like-minded people that understand the journey and can talk to you in a very comforting way, that in the end, it will be okay if you can just find that comfort zone to talk about what your needs are. Because the worst thing that you could do, especially in an employee situation as well, is not be open about what's going on with your care situation.
Oh my gosh, you have hit on what is probably the greatest. I do a fair amount of public speaking in the world when we could actually do public speaking in
Yes.
live audiences. And the number of employee caregivers that hide that from their manager, their boss, their shift leader, whomever. And it's an interesting thing. It's, in some ways, it's a holdback to 50 years ago when employers were not amenable. They certainly weren't looking to help out. And employees said, well, I don't want to give them a reason to fire me or to right. But on the other hand, employers, when we talk to them, they say, we're not aware that we have any employee caregivers, because it's shocking, right? And so we encourage employers to do lots of surveys and to ask. We help them craft the right questions to ask, right? What's fascinating is if you say to somebody, are you a caregiver? They don't often raise their hand until you define what caregiving looks like. Yeah, exactly. And so it is an evolving solution to a problem we need to put more light onto. And folks such as yourself are doing an amazing job at it.
Well, thank you. I'm a very big proponent of servant leadership, the concept of servant leadership. And I think if more corporations and organizations saw that concept, especially as it relates to family caregiving and really all the social issues that come up, what happens? You have a stronger workforce. You have more dedicated employees because they feel empowered to be a part of the mission.
There is no question that connection, and by the way, that connection needs to start at the top and work itself all the way down.
Very true. Yes.
Right. And it needs to be emboldened, not just in a saying on a wall, but to your point, integrated in the actions, the activities, the way they speak, the way we speak, right? That needs to permeate everything that we do.
I would love to work with you on how to make that happen in organizations throughout the country.
It sounds like we can add that to our ongoing list of things to talk about for sure. Exactly.
One area that I really would like to talk about before we get to our break is we've talked around it, but I'd like to really know more about CareScouts.
So CareScout started about 20 years ago, and they evolved from a caregiving empathy position. And that's important because when you think about an evolution of a company, starting out as caregivers and emanating outwards allowed them to build a business that always, as its primary mission, had empathetic, customized care advocacy. And so Genworth, about a decade ago, bought them as a service for our policyholders. We knew that our policyholders were reliant on family caregivers, and we wanted to provide a service to them that said, if you need help, here's how they can help you. And candidly, it was not all because out of love or benevolence. It was also good business for us to try and help people stay at home longer, age in their house, live healthier lifestyles. And what we found through building this over the last 10 years is that when we speak to caregivers and their loved ones earlier. And we provide some version of a care advocacy or a care plan,
Yes.
right? Where we say, here are the resources. We know people want to age at home. Nobody, just like we say, nobody walks in saying, I can't wait to be a caregiver. I don't know of anybody who said, God, I cannot wait to move into a nursing home. Everybody wants to stay at home. And so CareScout's simple goal, that what they wake up to do is to provide caregivers and their loved ones with the tools and the customized resources to stay at home and live healthier at home. And so we do that in a variety of ways. We've meshed together over these 20 years a network of over 100,000 providers that touch every aspect of caregiving and care recipient, from financial to legal to the trades, where you've got to have somebody come in and make a modification. All of those services, you need to bring somebody in to provide adult supervision. Our network of nurses, in which we have over 35,000 affiliated nurses. We work across all 51 jurisdictions. There's not a state or a part of a state that we don't operate in and have a network in. And we built this providing relief for our policyholders. And about a year ago, we said, are we crazy? There are more people who need this than just Genworth long-term care customers.
Very good.
And we brought it out to the marketplace, and we're just now, over the last probably 4 or 5 months, launching it into the public space and concentrating really at the employer level. So the service that we provide, which we could talk more about, really we offer it through to employers to give a free service. The employer pays in every instance to provide free caregiving advocacy to their employees when they become caregivers. So we match up the company desire for empathy with their desire to provide no lost productivity, if you will, for their employee, and mesh up our expertise to be that phone a friend for them when they need it.
Talk about living servant leadership.
Absolutely. We are trying.
You and Genworth are doing it.
We are trying, and I have to tell you, when we meet companies who reach it, it's one thing when we reach out to them and they say we're interested. But when a company reaches that, they find us, they reach out to us, and they say, we've heard about it. Oh my gosh, it's a great conversation. That's servant leadership at its best.
That is servant leadership at its best. Well, goodness. Well, Larry, I think this is just a good time for us to take our break. And like what I'm doing with all our guests here on 30 and 30 Healing Ties is going to come back and ask you about a fun fact that I don't know about you that our listeners would want to know as well. So put your thinking cap on.
I got it.
Okay. You're listening to Healing Ties on the Whole Care Network. We'll be right back.
Tomorrow on Healing Ties 2.0.
People sometimes call me the happy, healthy caregiver, and I'm like, oh, no, this is a work in progress here.
Right.
That is the beacon of the goal for all of us, is to figure this out, and to make it easier for somebody else is ultimately what I would love to happen. I know there's some eye rolling happening, probably people listening like they're, we're not here to shit all over you.
Right.
Hi, this is Elizabeth Miller of happyhealthycaregiver.com. I am delighted to be invited to speak with Chris McClellan on the reboot of Healing Ties and the revamp of the Whole Care Network webpage. And I hope that you tune in tomorrow to hear Chris and I talk about self-care. So I'm all about teaching you, sharing with you how you can integrate self-care and caregiving into your busy life.
Join us tomorrow and every day in November for 30 shows in 30 days. Healing Ties 2.0. Available at thewholecarenetwork.com/Healing Ties and wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.
Well, welcome back, everybody. I'm continuing my delightful conversation with Larry Nisenson from Genworth, U.S. Life Insurance. And Larry, like I'm doing with all our guests, I'm putting you on the spot. We want to know that one fun fact about you that everybody wants to know.
So my one fun fact is I was a restaurateur earlier in my career. Before I ever got into this crazy financial services business, I was a 7-day-a-week restaurateur.
Okay, so I have to take it one step farther. What was the specialty of the restaurant?
Oh my gosh, we were a neighborhood breakfast, lunch, and dinner, little tiny luncheonette in the center of an urban city in New Jersey, and our specialty was deli. So pastrami and corned beef and brisket and all of that good stuff.
Oh, my mouth is watering now for a great brisket. Richard used to make the best brisket. Oh, goodness gracious, Ignatius. Now I'm going to be thinking about that brisket. But that's a really good one. Well, thank you for that.
My pleasure, and thanks for asking me. I don't often get to talk about my restaurant business anymore.
Well, it's one of the things that we're doing here on with the reboot of Healing Ties is that we have we've had a very informative, fun, and serious conversation the first half. But like for a lot of us, and I say this very kindly, there's more to our life than just caregiving. And we want to make sure that people remember their hobbies and people remember the things that they do. And I'm hoping it's a nice blend. I've gotten some really interesting and wonderful responses, but you're the first one that's been in the restaurant business. So I like that.
Well, that's great. And I love the format that you've got. I love the conversation. I think it's been, the dialogue back and forth is fantastic. And hopefully your listeners enjoyed it as much as I did.
I'm going to give it a thumbs up 100% for sure. But Larry, we just have a couple of minutes left in the episode. Let our listeners know how they can learn more about you, CareScouts, and all the great products that Genworth provides.
Absolutely. I would encourage them to go to Genworth, GenWorth.com. When you go to Genworth.com, you can find out things like how much does care cost. We do a cost of care study available. You can look at the COVID consumer sentiment study to see the impact of COVID on caregiving. And if you're a caregiver, you can find many more resources there to really understand and help your loved ones, family, and friends understand what caregiving is about. You can go to CareScout, CareScout.com to learn more about our CareScout offering and the way we apply care advocacy. And you can find me on Twitter at Nisenson. It's Nisenson on Twitter. Or you can email me for sure at Larry.Nisenson, again, Nisenson at Genworth.com if there's anything I can do for you. And thank you again, Christopher, for having me. It's been such a pleasure.
And I believe this isn't the last time we will be speaking on Healing Ties and the Whole Care Network.
Fantastic.
Larry, with the stories you share and the work that you do, you are certainly someone who's creating healing ties all around us. I can't thank you for spending the time with me today.
Thank you again. It was my pleasure, and I'll look forward to connecting again.
Very good. Well, that does it for this episode of Healing Ties. As you know, I'm your host, Christopher McClellan. You know me as the Bowtie Guy. I've created a life to love after caregiving ends by sharing stories, resources, and being with awesome people like Larry Nisenson. Healing Ties is produced in the now Plush Studios. I was told I needed to correct it from Posh to Plush Studios of Oddbox Production in St. Louis, Missouri, and is part of the Whole Care Network. Check out our soft launch of the Whole Care Network website and be sure to meet Bo. And please subscribe to Healing Ties wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. We'll see you for another episode of Healing Ties, tomorrow, as we continue our 30 podcasts in 30 days to celebrate National Family Caregivers Month. Thanks for listening. Take care. Bye for now.
Ciao.
This is WCN, the Whole Care Network. You talk, we listen.